coffee beans in the morning. It smells so good.
Oh, yeah.
It smells amazing. Now, is it... All right. Here we go. All right. I guess we'll get started then. All right. I'd like to welcome y'all to another episode of the Unframe of Mind show. I had this nice young lady by the name of Elsa Byskov reach out to me and asked to be on the show because she had a new book that she's trying to promote called the Death is an Illusion. And that kind of piqued my interest because as you all know who watch the show, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in many of these different type of spiritual type things. So I am very open-minded about it. So I was curious about it, and I agreed to have you on the show, and I sure appreciate you coming. She's the owner of the website called New Spiritual Science, if you want to check her work out. So welcome to the show, Miss Elsa.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I guess before we get really rolling, if you wouldn't mind tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this idea and what is the idea, that kind of thing. Just give us a little background.
Yeah, sure. As I said, I'm Danish, and when I was 40, my husband and I decided to move to Spain. And that's where we are now. That's where I'm talking from now. And we opened a dental clinic and we worked down here for 25 years. Now we're retired. But when I was 45, I had been a searching soul for my whole life. And I was an atheist. I was a sworn atheist. And I had I excluded myself from the church. I was no longer a member of any church, and I was absolutely happy about that. I got married at the town hall, and my children were never baptized. I was absolutely fine about it. And then one day after we had moved to Spain, something strange happened. I was a searching soul. I was looking for answers to the mystery of life. Why were we here? What were we doing here? And then I opened. One of our friends came down from Denmark with boxes of our books, and on top in one of those boxes there was a book about a Danish mystic and visionary called Martinus, who lived from 1890 to 1981. And something strange happened. I opened that book, and I knew that this was what I had been searching for. So I read the article that was in the book, and I knew I have to get into this. So we bought all the books available written by Martinus, and that was about round about 5,000 or 6,000 pages, and all written in Danish. And it being my native language, I read it and I was over the moon about it. I mean, everything, all the answers I had ever had were answered. All the questions I'd ever had were answered. And it was just so mind-blowing. I was really totally impressed by it. And I was just thinking, whoa, this is amazing. I have to tell somebody about it. And because I have studied English at university, I thought I'm going to write about it in English. And that resulted in my first book called Death is an Illusion. It actually was published in 2002, so it's been on the market for quite some time. And since then I have written, I just finished the 7th. It hasn't been published yet. So I've written 6 other books about aspects of Martinus's worldview. And the reason why you can suddenly go from being a convinced atheist to no longer being it is that what Martinus reveals is a complete world picture based on logic. I mean, the problem with the religions is that there's so much nonsense. Excuse me. I hope I'm not offending anybody. But there's a lot.
You're on the right show for that.
There's so many things that don't make sense, and that was why I left the established religion, because it just didn't make any sense. What was this thing about an all-knowing, all-loving God when you could see all those unhappy fates, and if God was all-knowing and he knew the fate of this child would be unhappy, then why did he make that child be born? And if he let it be born to suffer, then he wasn't all-loving. And if he didn't know the suffering, then he wasn't all-knowing, Like ordinary logic can easily undermine such a statement from the religions. So I just thought, get me out of here. I don't want it to have anything to do with any religion. But in the Martinez's work, which, by the way, is not a religion, it is spiritual science, which means it is spirituality subject to the laws of science. Of course, you cannot prove it in the way you can prove physical stuff, because you can't make an experiment that confirms it. But using your logic and your intelligence, you can see that this is so hard to refute. Anyway, so.
Well, before you go on, I'm going to hop in here. I've already come up with a number of questions just based on what you said so far. I guess I'm curious is like what was it about Martinez's work that like snapped in your mind that made you say, okay, this is the answer right here, and why, maybe if you could answer why hadn't anybody else really noticed this work, I guess.
It was the overwhelming logic of it that really made me become a huge supporter. And the thing is that Martinez died in 1981. It's not that many years ago. When he died, he left a legacy of 10,000 pages. And obviously, not all of it has been translated. I'm so lucky to be Danish, so I can read it all. And most of it has also been translated into Swedish and some into Norwegian. But it is mostly in the Scandinavian countries that Martinez's work is known. And translators are hard at work translating it. I myself am translating it into Spanish. But it is a huge job. And on the Martinez website, you can see the status of how many languages what has been translated into. But just imagine translating 10,000 pages of very, very difficult spiritual ideas. So it takes time to get it all translated. A lot of it has been translated into English, and you can see the status of that also on the Martinez website, martinez.dk. So anyway, I think that's the reason, one of the reasons why it hasn't become better known yet. But it's all happening. It's happening, but it's happening slowly, because there's also a lot of opposition to it. Sometimes people will shout Antichrist or something. Which it absolutely isn't.
You've even heard that as an atheist, haven't you? Which also makes no sense, does it? No sense at all. And obviously, well, when people don't know what it is, and a lot of people have a lot of ideas about what it is before they actually dig into it and see what it actually is. They think it's just something. Oh, no. I'm not interested in that. But when you have read it, it is overwhelming. It is so grand and amazing and magnificent that I really don't have words for it. And in my own humble way, I'm trying to convey the wonderful and absolutely fantastic ideas that Martinez come across with in my books, sort of trying to translate it into ideas and words that are maybe more accessible to people. So is it that it's written in Danish that it's difficult to translate, or is it that it's written in like a higher level vocabulary in Danish, or is it just that the ideas don't translate themselves? The ideas, both, I would say, both. I mean, the ideas are complex and they are completely new. Mm-hmm. It opens, when you study Martinez's work, it opens up new areas in your brain. You start feeling sleepy, and then that's when your brain starts to expand, which is very interesting. But also because Martinez was a completely unread person. He had never studied anything. And he hadn't been trained in writing. So he just wrote the way any normal person would write. And that means that
he writes very long sentences that will take up half a page. And of course, the syntax can sometimes be absolutely horrendous. So that's one of the problems. So there's like two problems: the language problem and the concept problem as well. So it's not an easy task, but of course it's a very, very, very interesting task.
Well, is it like he has good ideas, but it's just he has difficulty maybe communicating them in a clear and concise manner that, you know, more knowledgeable Danish writers would have been able to do? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that the complication also comes here, and this is what I'm going to explain. When Martinus was a completely unread person. He was born out of wedlock in a very poor environment in the north of Jutland, and he never studied anything. He just went to an ordinary school, and then he was trained as a dairyman, and he worked as a dairyman. And when he was in his 20s, he moved to Copenhagen, where he actually lived for the rest of his life. He died when he was 90. And when he was 30, Martinus sat down one day to meditate on the concept of God. He'd always had a very close relationship with God. He couldn't explain where it came from. It came from his own inner being. One day he sat down to meditate, and when he was 30, that was. And he had he experienced an expansion of his consciousness. Like he experienced that the figure of Jesus came walking towards him in his vision, and it walked right into him. And then from the light, and he could then see the whole planet revolve, and he could see valleys and landscapes and everything. And it was a very strange experience. The next day he meditated again. He had a new experience, not similar, but more on the same lines. And after these 2 consecutive days, when he had these experiences, he noticed that his consciousness had become expanded, that he could now suddenly see beyond the physical plane. His vision had become so that he could see into the sea of knowledge of the universe. And it was like everything, all the questions he had, he could answer. When he focused on a question, the answer came like this, came like just into his mind. And of course he was very surprised, would be an understatement. He had no idea what had happened to him. So, but he had a friend who had studied a lot of theosophy and philosophy and all sorts of religion. So he went and asked that person. He said, whoa, I have read about people who have had this type of experience, but whoa. And then this friend, he started asking Martinus a lot of questions, and Martinus was able to answer them all, which was very amazing. But then he had to sort of gradually adjust to this new state of his consciousness. But after 7 years, he had this adjustment in place, and that's actually when he started writing his work. And his main work is called The Book of Life, or Livets Bog. It's 3,000 pages of spiritual wisdom. And I tell you, when you have looked and when you have read it, you are never, ever going back to looking at the world in the same old way again. That is simply impossible. Your mind has been stretched to new dimensions, and it cannot be shrunk back to the way you looked upon the world again. Yes. And obviously, not obviously, but from the time when he had his, let's call it a revelation, or let's call it an expansion of his consciousness, to the day he died, that was 60 years. Mm-hmm. And he wrote every day. He wrote from 4 o'clock in the morning till late in the afternoon. Then he went for a walk. And he was incredibly diligent. And that is why he could leave such a legacy of 10,000 pages. I won't say I have read them all, but I have read almost all of them. New articles and new stuff keep being found in the archives. But
Well,
it completely changed my life.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes. Let me ask you this. No. As somebody who is on the outside of this, and I'm an atheist, so I don't subscribe to any religion. No. The way you're describing it sounds just like somebody who had maybe just experienced reading the Bible for the first time. It sounds very, very similar to the verbiage that would be used that I've heard a lot of new Christians, they'll say they read the Bible and it changed their life and expanded their mind in such a way. I guess what I'm looking for is a little more of the substance that differentiates this from those other religions that you disagree with.
Yes, the thing is that what really changed. Well, the new thing here is the logic of it, and the details of it. I mean, if you could look at the New Testament, mm-hmm. This has the New Testament. The four Gospels of the New Testament were written about 80 years after Jesus died, and they were written by people who had heard what these people experienced. And it's really just fragments. It's fragments of, what can we say, the spiritual reality. But what Martinez reveals is the whole thing, a complete world picture comprising the spiritual level and the physical level. What is the reason of the physical level and what is the reason of the spiritual level? And when are we here and when are we there?
Oh, so what you just said suggests to me that you think the Bible is true. It's just not the whole picture. Is that
exactly?
Is that fair to say? So
that is absolutely fair to say. And Jesus actually said, according to, I think it was Matthew or John, I'm not sure. Actually, I think it was Luke, who said, "I have many more things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. But the spokesman, the Holy Spirit, that the Father will send in my name, will reveal the whole truth to you." And the reason why Jesus had to put it like that is that at the time when he lived, people were not very intellectually evolved. They were still very much living on their instinct, and their intelligence had not developed to the point that it has today.
You mean like 2018?
Exactly. And for that very reason, the whole explanation of the whole universe and the whole world picture had to wait until people were able to understand it. Because 2,000 years ago when Jesus lived, people had what he taught had to appeal to their feelings. He could not appeal to people's intellect because at the time they didn't have an intellect. But as we live life after life after life, we evolve and we become more and more intellectual. And that has something to do with the evolution of the basic energies, but that's a different story, which probably we shouldn't get into now. But as we evolve, we become more and more intellectual. Sorry. Which is also, reflected in the fact that it's only 200 years ago that we actually started having science. Before that, we had no science. So our intellectuality has evolved, and in order to provide a spiritual foundation for people alive today, you have to reveal something that will appeal not to their feelings, but to their intellects. And I think that was what really, really struck me with the Martinez's work, was that how that appealed to my intellect. I just said, yes, 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 all the time, because it so made sense. It completely resonated with me. And obviously not everybody would resonate with it, but some people at the point that we are living in right now are sort of ready for it. And let me put it like this. For my own part, I think it was, when the when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. That absolutely happened in my case. I was ready for it. I'd been a searching soul my whole life, and here it was. And it was just like, it changed my life.
So help me make sense of that. Connecting the logic to the spiritual realm. I guess I'm looking for that moment of substance that can convince me that my atheist ways are wrong is what I'm looking for here.
Let me tell you this: your atheist ways are not wrong. Martinez clearly points out the atheist stage is a stage on the road towards having an interest in spiritual science, because when you are a convinced religious person and you are absolutely certain that what your religion tells you is true, you don't need the work of Martinez. You are not. I mean, you don't need a doctor when you're not ill. The atheists are those who are ill. I won't say they're ill, but Martinez says it's a completely natural step before you sort of reach a point when you are ready for a new way of looking at the spiritual dimension, not as an object of faith. Martinez's work is not an object of faith; it's an object of study. And when you have studied it, what you have to do is compare it to what you see in the world, and only then will it make sense to you. He doesn't want you to believe in it. He just wants you to reflect on it. Read it, study it, reflect on it. And obviously, it's only among the atheists that we will find people who are absolutely open for it. An open-minded atheist will be the person who will have a look, maybe, or maybe not, have a look at the Martinez work and see, well, this is exactly what I was looking for. He's absolutely not interested in getting proselytes or getting followers. Martinez knew that his work would only become of importance in maybe 200 years. We're still so early days, really early days. But there are people living right now that are absolutely hungry and in need for his work, like me. And of course, I'm not the only one, but there are still not very few, but I have no idea how many there are. Maybe 10,000 people in the world, maybe 10,000 in Scandinavia and 500 outside it, or something like that.
So let me try to get this. Let me try to understand this now. You're saying that so the appropriate path or the most common path or what have you is for me to go from, say, I'm a Christian and then I go to atheism. I have to go to atheism in order to understand this spiritual science that is actually Christianity plus science. I guess I'm trying to make sense of that, because you would think if I'm already a Christian, I should be open to just something that only builds upon what I already believe, versus having to go through the path of disbelieving everything I once believed and then going into another path of rebelieving everything I once believed plus everything else.
I think what you will find when you read Martinez's work is that he refers to many of the things that was said by Jesus, and he interprets them in the light of the spiritual science. Martinez was a huge fan of Jesus, really. And but he said that it was limited, as I said, what Jesus could say at the time he lived, and that's why a fuller explanation was needed. So yes, you can, of course, build on. That happened to me. I remembered some of the stuff I'd learned in school, and I said, oh, whoa, this is interesting. So Martinez tells us that this is actually what was meant when Jesus said so and so. So yes, and yes, it is among the atheists that you will find people who will become searching souls. I mean, when you first become an atheist, of course, you're not a searching soul. You're happy to get rid of all that religious stuff. I remember I was thinking, who needs God anyway? And
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's a common experience for everybody. I know from a lot of atheists I speak with, it's a pretty terrifying experience. I mean, it's like, it would be a lot easier, and actually it would be, especially where I live, I'm kind of in the Bible Belt of the South in the United States. It would be so much easier for me to just believe, as far as my social circles and my community and everything else, my family, friends. So I don't know that that's necessarily the same experience as one experienced in, say, the European countries, where atheism tends to be a little more accepted than it is over here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And your problem is you would actually like to believe, but you can't. You can't. And why can't you? because your instinct, what you when you believe, you do that with the energy of instinct. And your instinct, the instinct that you have lived on for so many incarnations, has become so degenerate that it is no longer present in your mind, in your mentality. So you can't. That's exactly what happened to me. I wanted to believe, but I couldn't. I bloody couldn't. And then that was it. But then, of course, you live for a certain period of time. This may not be my first incarnation as an atheist. I could have been an atheist for several incarnations. I don't know. But then at a certain point, you start to look for answers. Life itself teaches you so many things every day. You are exposed to teachings from God, from the universe, from the Great Spirit, whatever you want to call it. I don't care what you call it. Neither does God, for that matter. You can call it whatever. But because of what life shows you, you would eventually you will start to think, oh, that's funny. Well, how did that happen? Like, for instance, how did I find your website? How did you suddenly pop up on my screen? And you will begin to see that there are strange serendipities, coincidences. What's going on here? It's as if somebody is sort of leading me towards something. And you will start to think there's something more. It can't all be based on chaos and coincidence and random mutations. There has to be a logic, an intelligence behind all this. And when you look at the world, and it looks so brilliant, and it like the way that nature works, everything is recycled, there's complete harmony, it's beautiful, you pick up a special energy when you go into nature, and you start thinking, there's something more, there has to be something more. And that's when you start to become susceptible to Martinez's ideas, and then you become the fertile ground in which his seeds have been sown.
That's an interesting word you used, as being susceptible to, because that doesn't fall under science. That's not a very scientific word, being susceptible to someone's ideas.
No.
I guess what I'm curious about is what was like. Say you were once a Christian, is that? And then you went to atheist. So what was something that you once believed as a Christian that you didn't believe as an atheist, that then you went into Martinez's work, and then suddenly you were able to reconnect with that idea? What was one? Give me maybe one example of something that.
I think this idea that, for instance, what I was taught in school, I mean, I went to school in the 50s, was that a child that dies before it has been baptized will go straight to hell. Like, what kind of God would condemn an innocent
Seems reasonable.
Child
Seems totally reasonable.
Eternal hell, just because of the whim of some parents who haven't got him dragged to the church.
Yeah. Your parents are terrible. You're suffering for it forever, for eternity.
Exactly. Stuff like that.
And not to mention, you're way too little to be able to make any changes to that or have any responsibility. I'm sorry.
Exactly. And I mean, stuff like that. Like, for instance, a child that is born out of wedlock will go straight to hell.
Oh.
How about that? That makes sense, doesn't it?
Guess I'm going straight to hell.
So
thanks, Mom. Thanks a lot, Mom. I appreciate that.
Exactly. Why did you have sex with that guy? Anyway, so it just, things like that, they make absolutely no sense. And you think, if that's how things are, and if that's what the church tells me, I'm out of here. And you can only go too slowly.
Okay, so that was something for you that made you go, okay, this is bullshit. I'm not, throw all that away. And then you read Martinez's work, and then you read.
It makes absolutely no sense. And the problem with a lot of the things, the dogmas that are taught in the Christian religion, is that they are interpretations made by priests later on. They're nothing that have actually very little to do with what Jesus taught.
Tell me about it.
and they have been made like reinterpreted or interpreted further by the priests. For what reason? In order to have power over the congregation, in order to stay in power themselves, and just look at it. And it's just like it cannot appeal to intelligent people living in a society with a scientific outlook. There's too much hocus pocus in it.
So wait a minute. So I guess what I was expecting was that you were going to tell me that you went into Martinist work, and now that whole idea of a child going to hell for not being baptized kind of made sense now. Like, or that's not what you're. So I guess that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. Is what was something that
on the
didn't,
contrary.
Yeah.
On the contrary. I mean, that is absolutely not how it is.
Right.
Absolutely not.
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out what is something that didn't make sense as a Christian, but now makes sense as somebody who studies Martinist work. You can take your time. I can always edit out. Yeah, it's fine.
No. But I think I remember, yes, one thing. I remember being in school, and I was taught that there were other religions that believed in reincarnation, but we didn't.
Okay.
And I was thinking, why the hell don't we believe in that? Because I was thinking, if I were to die during an operation through no fault of my own, because the doctors had messed up, and that would be my only life, then what? And I thought, that makes no sense. And then when I was introduced to the idea of reincarnation via Martinus's work, it totally made sense. Because the thing is, if you look at life in a one-life perspective, it is unjust, it is unfair, and it is unloving, and it is illogical. But once you start looking at life in the larger perspective, comprising a whole number of lives, indefinite lives really, then the fate of one person will level out. Like today, if you look at the world and you see a child starving in Africa, and that child dies when he is 2, and you see a prosperous person living a whole life in prosperity and happiness, and you compare these two fates, and you say, if this is the only life that these people have, then where's the justice? What's the sense? What sense does it make? It makes absolutely no sense. But when you look at life in the real perspective, which is of course a whole number of lives, then our fates will level out. One life we will be miserable and poor, another life will be rich and famous and happy, and in that way, our fates can only be understood in the perspective of several lives. The one-life theory so sucks, in my opinion. It has no explanation. Why would we live only one life? What's the whole point of that? We know that we learn, we go through life and we gather experiences, and then when we die, that's it. So what should we actually do? What's the point of all those experiences?
Hey, I'm really excited for your enthusiasm, but you got to give me an opportunity to try to communicate back. This is exciting. I'm enjoying having the conversation. It just kind of becomes a fire hose to the face, and I don't have a chance to ask questions back. I just hate to keep interrupting you. That's all. But I guess okay. So far I've asked you for two examples, and I've asked you for examples, and two examples you've given me. The first one was about children going to hell for not being baptized, which was a part of the religion that when you went to atheism you didn't believe, and then you went to Martinist work and you still don't believe. And then the second example was something that the Christian religion didn't have. You went to atheism, and then you went to Martinist work, and now it's a new thing, that the reincarnation that you do believe. I'm still looking for that one thing that was, it was like positive, and then went. Okay, as a Christian, it's a positive belief. As an atheist, negative belief. And as somebody who studies Martinist work, now it's back to positive again. I'm just trying to look. Is there anything that's like that? That like when you read his work, you're like, oh, that didn't make sense to me before, but now it does make sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do understand, and there are so many examples. But
I just need one.
I didn't study a lot of Christianity either, because to be quite honest, it didn't interest me. Nor did any other religion interest me. And I was like a clean slate when I ran into the Martinez's work, which is probably a very good thing for me, because I didn't have anything to unlearn first. I didn't have any beliefs to unlearn. I just sucked all the Martinez's stuff up like a sponge.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So it's like I guess that makes sense why you would use words like being susceptible to ideas. You were already ready for something, you just didn't know what that something would be, and this was your something you found. That's interesting.
Precisely.
That's interesting. So I was curious. You did say something about during the reincarnation part where having one life was illogical. I was just curious if you could unpack that one for me a little. What makes having one life illogical?
Because if you look at you cannot. Nobody can understand his or her fate seen in a one life perspective, because the thing is, and Jesus would also this was also something that Jesus taught: you reap as you sow. So when you are a kind person, a loving person, you will reap kindness and love. But when you are an unkind person, when you are greedy and unfriendly and lie and cheat and all that, that will also come back to you, because in the universe, all energies go in cycles. So sooner or later, whatever you send out, you will receive back from the universe. It will come back. This is the law of attraction that sees to this. And the law of attraction is another huge subject. But when you live the one life theory, when you live in the one life theory, you can actually call the one life theory the gospel of egoism. Because when you think you only live one life, you become so egoistic and greedy. Just look at the bankers. Look at all the bosses that are just like scraping millions and millions of dollars for themselves, money that they can never use, that they can never find time to spend in one life. Why is that? Because they think this is never going to have a consequence. And if I cheat somebody, or if I beat up my wife, or if I go and kill somebody, it won't have any consequence. I can just do what the fuck I want. And here I am in my happy only life, and so on. But what they don't realize, and they're not going to be happy when they realize it, is that what you sow in one life, you can reap in another life. So there's absolutely no getting away from the things you have sown. So, unless you have that perspective, you cannot understand your fate. You cannot understand your fate. And also, if you look at different people on different levels, like you can have a terrorist here, or you can have like a normal person, and you can have a really loving person. And you could ask yourself, why are these people so different? Is it just based in the genes? No, it's not. People stand on different levels on their path of evolution. Not everybody have come equally far in this evolutionary path.
I can agree with that.
And those who are maybe not that evolved will still think, it's my right to go and kill. I'll go and kill my enemy, and I will seek revenge, and that's so good. And then I will have my honor reestablished and all that. And they think, well, that's absolutely how it is. Good. And now I've lived that life, and fantastic. But they don't realize that when they're reborn, they will have to deal with all this. This energy that they have sent out will come back to them and become their fate. And that's why I think, and Martinez says that coming to grips with the law of karma, which is simply you reap as you sow, is the biggest challenge facing humanity today. Because as long as you think that you can just go and do whatever and piss on people and treat them badly and without any respect, you think, I'll just do that. Look at Trump. I'm so rich and I can do anything. And nobody is gonna hold this against me. It's it's such a shitty way of looking at things,
well,
because that's not how it is.
I do appreciate your perspective on that, and that sounds like a neat idea, and it would be, I think it would be kind of cool to know that, you know, I'm going to have other opportunities to get this right if I fail this one. You know, it takes the pressure off for sure.
Exactly.
I guess what I'm curious is, are there like any independent studies that have been able to support this theory? You know, actual scientific studies to support the science behind, is there any way to prove, like, if I die, I'm going to come back as somebody else? Like, how?
Yes.
Are there independent studies?
Yes, there is. Let me just point out that a lot of study has actually been done about it, but it's difficult to study the spiritual level with the tools that you have created on the physical level, because you can't measure and weigh the spiritual level, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So you have to use other ways. But of course, I've written a whole book about the evidence, and it's called The Undiscovered Country, and that is full of the evidence for life after death. But let me mention it. The first and maybe the most well-known aspect is the near-death experience, which has been subject to a lot of scientific study. There was a longitudinal study in Holland conducted by a scientist called Pim van Lommel. And people who have been technically dead have left their physical body and have had an experience outside the body. Mm. And then they were resuscitated somehow, and they came back to their physical body, and they were able to tell a lot of the stuff that they experienced. And they could see their body being operated on. From a position above the bed, they were able to see what was going on. They could see the color of the clothes that the surgeon was wearing, and very interesting details. And hundreds of books have been published about the near-death experience, and they're very, very interesting reading. Mm-hmm. And of course because the whole point here is that we are not identical to our physical body. We are identical to our consciousness. Our consciousness and everything that we are is a field of energy, and that field of energy pulls out of the physical body when we die. And that field of energy stays alive. It's energy. It cannot be, according to the first law of thermodynamics, it cannot be destroyed. It exists. It keeps existing. And that field of energy is what survives the physical body. The physical body is just an instrument, as you said, instrument for our sojourn here on the physical plane for as long as it is usable, for as long as we can use it. As soon as it becomes like if it's harmed, or if we're in an accident, or if we become old and it is no longer a serviceable instrument, we pull our energy out, and we leave the body there. But that is only one. I think that is only one of the pieces of evidence that we have for it. Another hugely and very well studied point is children who remember past lives, and that has been studied by Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia. And he's dead now, but his whole life he conducted studies into children who spontaneously remembered a past life, and they could point out where they lived, who they were, what their parents, what their wives was called, who their parents were. They could point out the house they lived in. It's very, very interesting. And the best known work of Ian Stevenson is called 20 Cases Indicative of Reincarnation. And another famous, whom I have met personally, is Erlendur Haraldsson, an Icelandic researcher who his whole life has researched also into cases of children who remember past lives. Let me just make a point here that those children who actually remember their past life are in general people who have had a violent death, who have been either killed or died under dramatic circumstances, let me put it like that. And that seems that some memories from their former life spill over into their next incarnation. When they reach the age about 7 or 8, they will normally start to forget them. But ask any child of 3 who were you when you were big? And they will be so happy to tell you.
Well, let me ask you this then. Okay, so you understand the plural of anecdote is not equal data as far as scientific research goes? Is that
the what?
The plural of anecdotes is not equal to data. It doesn't mean it's true. If it's anecdotal stories, what you're giving me so far is anecdotes of stories that people have told. And
no, well, you can call it anecdotes, but look at Ian Stevenson's very scientific work. He was a highly acknowledged scientist working from the University of Virginia. I mean, I wouldn't call his work anecdotes.
Oh no, that's not what I mean. What I mean is like, have there been independent studies done in strict scientific scenarios as far as you got to have like double-blind placebo or double-blind studies, that kind of thing to validate the information, and then that anybody should be able to take that finding and be able to replicate that in a completely new place, completely independent of the original researcher, that kind of thing.
Let me give you the Afterlife Experiments conducted at the University of Tucson, Arizona, by Jill Schwartz.
By the way, I do appreciate your patience with me here. I really am curious about it. So
no, it's fine. Because that was exactly what Jill Schwartz wanted to do. He wanted to do exactly what you were saying, double blind and all that. And he's published a work called The Afterlife Experiments. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Okay.
And that is part of the evidence. If we're talking about evidence, we have the near-death experience. We have children that remember past lives. We have the Afterlife Experience conducted by Jill Schwartz in Tucson. We have regression therapy, which is also highly interesting. People who will be suffering from deep traumas that they can't understand where come from. And it's really life debilitating for them to carry these traumas around. Mm-hmm. And they will go to a regression therapist which will take them back to the life in which these traumas arose. I've tried it myself, and it's the most very, very powerful therapy. And it's actually not so difficult. You think, oh, that's very difficult. But we must remember that in our consciousness, in the whole, which sits in our aura, it doesn't sit in the brain, we carry around the memories from the lives we have lived before. But they're not day conscious memories. We can't remember them on a daily basis. But when we are taken back, like into a trance or maybe into hypnosis, we can actually access these memories. And that's when a regression therapist will then take the patient to the place and time when the trauma arose, and then just like maybe just reliving it or facing this thing will really, really help that patient, and the trauma will ease up so much. It's a very, very powerful thing. And if you read, there's also a huge amount of books written about regression therapy, and they're very, very interesting read as well.
Sure.
And then there's after-death communication, which has also been studied, and there's a lot of books published about it. The most famous one is the Guggenheim's Hello from Heaven, where they list a whole range of people who have had contact with their deceased relatives or loved ones, and have come in the most very interesting and very difficult, very, very different types of telephones that are not connected, that will suddenly ring and somebody will tell them stuff, and like visions or sounds and basically the thing is that all these communications, they say one thing: stop worrying, stop grieving, I'm fine over here, stop worrying, stop grieving. And I mean, if you put all that together, and there's also the deathbed visions, but as I said, I've written extensively about it in my book, The Undiscovered Country. And if you put all that together and you hold it up against all this evidence, you hold it up against Martinez's work, it all fits. It fits like this.
That's nice.
Exactly. It so confirms everything that Martinez says. So obviously, one thing and the other. You cannot avoid becoming convinced that death is an illusion. That's my whole point, and I would certainly recommend that you read it, and I will be happy to send you a copy if you're interested. So that I mean, there's no hocus pocus about it. There's no trying to win you over. There's just like, read it, see if what it says resonates with you. If you don't, throw it out the window or give it to somebody else.
Yeah. No, I definitely don't mind checking it out. I'd be glad to take a look. Just a couple more questions before we wrap up here. Even as an atheist, I'm not totally blind to like the positive benefits of religious beliefs and spirituality and that kind of thing. And I was just curious for you in your own personal life, like how has this improved things for you, and how has this made, what positive benefits have you received from studying this work?
I became such a happy person. I mean, Martinez's worldview is so optimistic. It's a deeply optimistic worldview. Mm-hmm. And I mean, when people say, "Oh, the world is so terrible and we're all going down the drain and Armageddon is just around the corner," and I can just say, "No, it's not."
It's been just around the corner for centuries now, hasn't it?
Exactly, and it won't happen. Mm. Because the Earth is also a living being. We all are living beings inside living beings. And the world, the Earth, is the one in control here. We shouldn't think that we control the climate. That's preposterous, really. And I mean, once you have... I have the Martinez's work so much under my skin. I live it every day. Everything I observe, everything I see, I only see through his glasses. And I do see that everything is very well. It is just as it should be, depending upon the level of evolution that we, as the human beings inhabiting this planet, mm-hmm. have reached, and the level of evolution of the Earth that we are inhabiting. And I cannot tell you the bliss I live in, really. And once you start working and you become knowledgeable about the law of karma and the law of attraction, you start, instead of sowing, I mean, we've all probably lied and cheated and whatnot. And once you realize, well, that's not a good idea, I'd better stop that. Then you change the vibration of your aura and you will stop attracting it. Mm-hmm. So once you become a better person, it really pays to be good, you realize. Like, don't sow stuff that you don't want to reap. Like, don't shout at people and don't be disrespectful of people, because that's what you're going to reap.
It seems like some basic common sense.
It is so obvious. One day I was driving, we drive down to Spain in our car, and one day I was on the motorway and somebody overtook me. It pissed me off, and I gave him the finger. Wow. And 5 minutes later, I swear, somebody gave me the finger. I was just laughing. I said, that was a fast karmic response.
Instant karma.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like that. It really is like that. And once you realize that you reap as you sow, that is a very sobering thought. And you think, oh, I better stop lying and cheating and stealing and whatnot. I better be a good person. I better try. You can't become a good person from one day to the next, but you can practice.
Sure.
And that's what I've been doing. And I tell you, my life is so amazing. I mean, now I'm retired. I can spend all my time studying and writing about the Martinez work. I have a view of the Mediterranean right in front of me. And I'm a hiker. I'm an avid hiker. I hike in this absolutely fantastic hinterland that we have here in Spain. Is the most amazing nature. And everything my life is just absolutely wonderful. I don't focus on lack. I focus on abundance. I live in gratitude every day. When you live in gratitude, you attract more things to become grateful for. And I mean, but the whole perspective also, like when people are so sad about dying, I'm just thinking, oh, well, death is an illusion. You will move on to the next plane, and after some time, when you're well rested, you will reincarnate into a new little body, and you will continue your development exactly from the point where you were when you last died. So, I mean, what is there to worry about? Absolutely nothing. I don't worry about anything. I cannot tell you the kind of bliss I live in. Is that answer enough?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely appreciate Miss Elsa. This has been a fantastic and very enlightening conversation. I've never heard of any of this stuff until I've talked to you. So
There you go.
if anybody else who is watching is interested in studying this work and studying your work, where would you recommend they start? Where would be a good place for them to?
I would recommend that they start reading my book, Death is an Illusion, because that is like a general introduction to Martinez's world picture. It is simple. I've written it as simply as I could. It's my own words, and it's a very good introduction. And then once you have read that and you feel that this is interesting, you can, of course, go on to reading some of my other books. Or if you don't find it interesting, then just give the book to somebody else or whatever. I mean, we're not in a hurry here. This will unfold as it should. And when people are ready for it, they will become susceptible or open-minded.
All right. Well,
and ready for it. And but as Martinez said, that it will only become of real importance in 200 years. So we're only beginning here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's a whole shift. It's a whole cultural shift of the planet that will have to take place. And the very unhealthy parts of the old world culture will have to perish, because like this whole greed thing, and it will really have to stop, because at a point we have to realize, we will all realize that we are all one, and one cannot live without the others, and we cannot be happy. I cannot be personally happy when I look at somebody suffering in the gutter, and this is the direction that we will go in. But at the moment, the bad guys are in, if I can call them that, the bad guys are in the majority, and they still rule the world. But for every life we live, for every day we live, the more humanitarian people will grow. Their numbers will grow, and the bad guys' number will decline. And one day we will reach critical mass.
Beautifully spoken. Beautifully spoken. I sure appreciate you joining us today and hanging out for this time. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, good.
All right. So if y'all want to check out her work, like she said, check out her book Death is an Illusion, and I will have links in the low bar for any of that if you guys are interested. And be sure to hit Miss Elsa up and ask her questions. She's a very, very open person and very interested in answering questions, very curious about the universe, and I really appreciate that kind of soul in this world.